Module 3, Sentencing Approaches. Video 1, Deferred Sentences, Part 2.
I find that the most effective tool in affecting change is the use of the deferred sentence. It's a particularly useful tool if somebody is in receipt of some support, for example the Court Integrated Services Program. It's an opportunity to monitor the person in both a positive and negative way, to provide the person with support, provide the person with some motivation, even check in to see how they're looking. You can often see how a person's going on their program, and if you defer the sentence several times, you can actually chart their progress, and you're able to tell them how much better they look and motivate them in that way as well. It's very important in my view to address the contents of any report and say, oh well, your clinician says that you're doing particularly well in this area and I commend you for that. Why are you having difficulties complying with the clinician's recommendations in another area? To draw them out and really monitor how well they're progressing. And I find that most people blossom when they receive that sort of approbation and acknowledgement. And I also endeavour to acknowledge how difficult I understand their progress is, the sacrifices that they have to make in order to live a good life. So it's a very good opportunity to cover all of those areas. I would generally bring people back approximately once a month. However, if they're problematic, I might see them a little bit more frequently in the early stages of the deferrals, but generally for no longer than about 4 months, because I don't want to establish a dependent relationship, and I'd like the person to progress to a point where they can they've learned how to use the services, how to access the services, and can move on their own.
I find deferrals very useful, primarily to allow a person to stabilise. I think it's often the case that I'm wanting to explore a particular sentencing outcome, and I'm anxious that a person is not in a position to reliably comply with an order that I make without having supports firmly established around them. And so it's an important opportunity to put those supports in place. But I find that the quality of the information that I get from a person really increases when I bring them back on review, so that they know why they're coming, they've had time to reflect on their situation, and they become more communicative. And I get better information, and ultimately I think my sentencing is better informed.
Right. Now I tend to use deferred sentences in a different manner to KISP rollovers. With KISP matters, I obviously have the person that's on bail coming back each month with the report, and I do engage with that person and get the backgrounds to how they've been progressing, speak to them about matters where they might have to improve and show more endeavour. With deferred sentences, I tend to take that approach when somebody might have be young or have no particularly long criminal history, but has committed an offence that is quite serious, but they have just, when it comes to sentencing, for some reason embarked upon a counselling or treatment which would seem to go to the cause of their offending, and I'll give them the opportunity by way of a deferred sentence to complete that course of treatment or counselling.
When I have a person coming back before me over and again, either through credit bail or KISP or a deferred sentence, I sometimes use questions. So I give them some questions that they can take away and actually think about. And they're really open-ended questions based around motivational interviewing techniques that ask why they think they're offending, what do they think they need, what are the steps they need to take, and particularly who are their support people and who are going to help them through this process. And it just gives them the opportunity to think about this away from the stress of the court, and to ask people who are supporting them, whether it be their support workers or family or friends, about these issues, and then come back to court and address me on them. And I find that I get some really good quality responses from people when they've had time to reflect, and really identifying what is driving their offending and what they need to do. And it's very powerful, very insightful, and I think very useful for them, because they're coming up with the answers instead of just being told, and I think that's much more powerful.
I use deferred sentences most often when I'm considering placing someone on a community corrections order, and it would most often be a person who was not ready, in my view, to engage with corrections. I'm basically trying to establish a relationship with that person, so that person will want to satisfy my goals by complying with the arrangements that are made. But it's largely a practice session for a community corrections order, and many people, when they come to the court, are simply not ready for those sorts of orders. I don't think I'd ever use a deferred sentence if I thought imprisonment was the inevitable result, partly because of the risk to the community of further offending in a lot of cases, but also I think it would create such a false hope, and a lot of the purpose of deferred sentencing would be lost, because the person can't hope for a good outcome if the only outcome is jail.
The benefits of a deferred sentence in terms of making sure that people do acknowledge their remorse and the promises that they make the court during the plea hearing are actually followed through. So I use deferred sentences of up to 6 months to ensure that people do complete the residential rehabilitation they've promised to undertake, or have made the compensation payments they've promised to make. And that makes my sentencing task at the completion of that 6 months much easier.
Module 3 also includes the following resources: Video 1, Deferred Sentences Part 1, Video 3, Community Correction Orders, background materials, tip sheet,